So for our final talk of Everest 2022, we're delighted to welcome Diana Howles, award-winning speaker, author, and international virtual trainer to our Everest conference. As a world-class facilitator, she has trained Fortune 100 and 500 companies and facilitated virtual programs in more than a dozen countries. Diana is currently CEO of Howles Associates and author of the new book, Next Level Virtual Training. I'm excited, and I'm sure the audience are too, to hear more. So over to you, Diana.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Welcome, everybody. And thank you so much to Access Planet, obviously, and Lewis and Rebecca for all of your great work in putting on this wonderful conference. So today we're going to be talking about successfully facilitating live mixed learning. So let's get started. As Lewis mentioned, I'm CEO of Howles Associates. We are located in the north central part of the US. You see my contact information here. What we do is we work with clients on helping them with on-camera presence, learning experience design, virtual facilitation, virtual presentations, sort of all things virtual. So we love what we do. I also have a new book out called Next Level Virtual Training, just out this year. It is a modern resource guide to help current trainers really deliver excellent live online training. So feel free to check it out. Here is a testimonial from another author, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. So this is sort of the day in the life of us today and yesterday here at this training conference. And this is only half the story though, right? Here's the other half of the story. We are very comfortable, as I believe Jonathan talked about yesterday, right? It's good to be comfortable when we are online. So I'd love to hear in the chat from all of you. We have about 30, 40 of us here today. Here's my question for you. What are your feet wearing today? So let me know in the chat, and I'm going to be watching those. Lewis, what are your feet wearing today? Are you comfortable? He's gone off audio.
I am
here.
very comfortable. I am in a pair of sturdy walking boots that'd be suitable for a Chicago winter.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, let's hear from the rest of you. I want to see in chat. Oh, okay, here we go. We're starting to see them come in. I know there's 40 of you, so let's see those. Let's see those chats. You'll find it at the bottom of your screen. Looks like socks, slippers, trainers. What else? My personal favorite is barefoot. I feel more grounded when I'm barefoot and working online. Crocs. Love it. Good. Let's hear from a few more. How comfortable are you today? Remember yesterday, Jonathan was talking about he wants his clients to be comfortable. And of course, he wants to be comfortable too. So one of the perks, right, of being live and online. Well, let's talk a little bit about what many of you do in your organizations. You either train your staff or you train your clients, and live online learning works best for many of those topics that we do train and teach on. And obviously Access Planet is a great management system to help us do that. And then you also know that sometimes the traditional classroom works best. And many of you do that as well. And Access Planet supports that as well, administratively, helping with all of the things that we need to organize, right, when we're doing this type of training as well. But the reality is that now, after sort of coming out of the pandemic, we have a lot of hybrid work globally. And as Doug mentioned yesterday, one of the biggest learning and development trends is either going or staying hybrid. This idea of some of us work remotely and some of us come into the office a few days a week, this blend, right, of work. So this necessitates, and sometimes by choice, also we choose to then deliver hybrid learning. So you may have delivered some hybrid learning, or you may be delivering hybrid learning with your instructors to your clients. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Some people will say, somebody just this week said to me, oh, never do hybrid learning, that blending of both virtual and in-person learner. Never do it because it's just a disaster. The virtual learners will check out and they will not be involved, and try to avoid it. So this might be a common sentiment that you've heard as well, and we're going to explore that today. But first, would love to find out what workplace model your organization is using. So Lewis, let's put up our first poll and see where everyone is. I'll be quiet for a minute while you think about this and register your vote. Immediately, I saw the hybrid workforce shoot right up. And recently in another session that I was involved in, we also saw the huge majority was hybrid. All right, so let's go ahead and share those results with our audience, Lewis. And it looks like we're at about 76%, almost 80% have a hybrid workforce, and about 17% of you are fully remote. Look at that though, nobody is 100% in the office. Yeah, isn't that interesting? All right, thank you for voting, and thank you, Lewis, for putting that up there. Let's talk a little bit about this term hybrid. So when we think about the ways we've heard this word, you might have heard it used with hybrid cars, where we blend together fuel and electricity in an automobile, or hybrid systems, where the cooling and the heating are joined together, and we call that hybrid. Or you may have referred to hybrid in the context we're talking about with learning, but some people call this blended, right? There's many, many different terms. The term hybrid, in my opinion, is really overused, and because of this, can be confusing. So it seemed like this idea of blending online and on-site learners together warranted a new term. So some will say that it's here or there instruction, it's co-located learners, it's high flex, it's the concurrent classroom, hybrid, blended, right? There's so many terms. To me, it really warranted this fresh term. So what I like to call it is live mixed learning. And here's why. It happens in real time. It's not on demand. It is live. And there's this mix of both online and on-site components. So here's my definition: the live mix of both in-person and online participants and or instructors in this concurrent shared learning space. So we see how the learning space has expanded beyond four walls, right? In this digital learning space, it's no longer just a room. So let's see if we can apply our definition here. So in this example, we have an on-screen facilitator, we have people in the room, but it looks like the learners are the only ones who are in person. Would this format be considered live mix? So if you think it is, let me know by clicking in reactions at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a thumbs up icon in reactions. Give me a thumbs up if you think this format is considered live mixed as well. Or if you disagree, you can just not choose an icon. All right, so I see a couple hands going up. Is this still live mixed? All right. The answer is it is still live mixed, because even though our learners are all located together, we still have a component of online, right? The venue. And in this case, it is the instructor, the facilitator. So any combination is this idea of live mixed. So now that we've established what that definition is, let's bring up our other poll, Lewis, about how often does your organization use this blend, whether it's your instructors are co-located or your learners. So go ahead, and I'll be quiet while you vote here. All right. Let's go ahead and share those results, Lewis, if we could please. It looks like everyone is voting in every category, but clearly we're kind of tied at frequently and occasionally. So we have very seasoned folks with us. And then there's a few, a smaller percentage who will be doing it in the future. All right, great. Let's go ahead and close that poll. So you have tasted this experience and you've worked in this field. So let's talk about what are some of those challenges? I mentioned this story where this person said, oh, I recommend you not blending together or mixing together online and on-site learners. So in the chat, let me know what are some of those striking challenges that we deal with when we blend together these live mixed learning spaces. I'm going to watch for those in the chat. Many of you have experienced and have used this with your trainers and instructors, so you have experience in this area. All right, I see some of them coming in here. So yeah, thank you, Sam. He's saying instructor attention is biased to in-person students. We do see that bias, and here's an interesting thought. When you have only a few people in the room, one or two, and you have the majority of people online, it skews to the online folks. So it seems to be where the majority of people are can be where we skew it, but overall, yes, we do tend to gravitate toward the in-person. So more challenging discussions in the cohort, absolutely. Knowing when it's best to add to the conversation, thank you. And Rebecca mentioned too, those online participants tend to get overlooked. Yes. Okay, excellent. So we're going to talk about some of those because there are strategies that we can do to make live mixed more effective in terms of learning and impactful for your clients as well. So we're going to talk about 5 strategies. Our first strategy here is superb audio tech. So one of the keys to success is really investing the majority of your budget, if you can, into the excellent technology, because clear, good audio is even more important than good video. So, you know, I've worked with a professor who's been doing this for years. Higher education has been the leader in this field of live mixed learning. And he talks about too that importance of getting that audio tech right, doing your research. There's so many different ways that you can do it. You can hang microphones from the ceiling. You can use Zoom rooms like we're using Zoom events today. What I like to use with some of my customers is ClickShare conferencing. So you see the ClickShare sort of attachment there on the table. And then we use like Polycom studio cameras or Logitech cameras. And then they're omnidirectional. So they zoom in and zoom out. And then the ClickShare conferencing does the actual work to simulate it all together. And then we use this in tandem with the platform. So this particular client uses Microsoft Teams, but obviously there are many out there, Adobe Connect, WebEx, Zoom, so many of them. So really getting that audio conferencing, make sure it's excellent. So it's not a distraction. Another strategy we can use to, again, manage the challenges that we face when we are using live mixed learning is what I call this idea of co-facilitator and IT partnerships. So really in your organization, partnering with those who have technical expertise, ensuring that they're there when you're doing the setup. And yes, it does take more time. It does take more technical setup and troubleshooting ahead of time before class day to make sure everything works correctly. This idea of working with a co-facilitator also is helpful because when you have your instructors, and I know some of you employ your own instructors or do your own training, but when you have an instructor in this context, there's so much going on. It can be very easy for them to be overloaded. And in the learning field, we call this cognitive overload because there's so much to manage. I'm managing the tech. There might be issues in the room. Maybe somebody isn't able to hear. Maybe my slides aren't displaying to the virtual participants, right? There's double the technology challenges. So it's very easy for a facilitator or an instructor to be overwhelmed. So what has worked well in our experience is having what we call these instructors in each venue. And yes, it does take more resources, but it provides an anchor for each audience group in each venue. So there's a facilitator online, and there's a co-facilitator in the room. Either one could be the lead facilitator. And this way, one is teaching while the other is managing behind the scenes, almost like you would have a producer and a virtual instructor work together, similar to that. And then you switch off, maybe the virtual co-facilitator teaches, and then the in-person one manages that piece as well, but you work in tandem. So what do you do when there's more work for one person to handle? You hire more hands. And so this is exactly what this strategy is talking about. All right, well, what's our third strategy? The third one is strategic space design. It's thoughtful. We think about how the physical space is arranged because that either invites or does not welcome the conversations that you have within that space. Almost like the medium is massaging the message, which is something Marshall McLuhan talked a lot about in the 60s. So how does that work? Well, let's pause for a moment and think about when you as a leader meet with an employee, and let's say there is a desk between the two of you. What does that barrier communicate and influence in that interaction? Let me know in the chat. When you see this example of a desk between employee and manager, what kind of space is that creating? All right, thank you, Eleonora. Distance, what else? I think maybe if you've experienced that, you could have been on either end of this. Oh, wow. Yeah, Elaine, I am unavailable. Isn't that interesting? Like, certainly that may not be the perception at all of the leader, but that's what is perceived or communicated. Thank you. Yes, not welcoming. Good. A formal discussion, not anything casual. Yeah, it does feel very formal. Yeah, good. So what happens though when we change that interaction, bring leader and employee together at a round table? We're sitting next to each other. We're in a circle space. We're having a conversation about maybe performance. And what changes here? What does this convey? Let me know in chat. Good. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah, that everyone in the conversation is equal. We're kind of co-partners, right? It's inclusive. Good. Yeah. Changes the discussion. Now let's apply this to what we're talking about with live mixed learning environments. Here's an example of an organization I've worked with in the past, the Center for Exceptional Leadership. They are using here what's called a NEAT board, N-E-A-T. So you may have heard of that, and Lewis may be able to pop in the chat for you the NEAT link. But notice where this NEAT board is. It's on the end of this U-shaped table. And what message does that send? Thank you, Alan. Openness, right? So we are including you. You have a seat at the table, if you will. Thinking thoughtfully about how do we set this up so that all learners, right, have an equitable experience. Thank you, Rebecca, for putting that neat URL in the chat. Now, this is another organization called InSpace. They work a lot in academics, but they also have transitioned into the business space. And I know we have some colleges here today as well. But notice, look on the left side here, how the virtual learners literally, it looks like, have a seat at the table. Do you see that there? And here is what it looks like in the room. So we have some in-room learners, and then we have the projection of seeing that on screen. So literally inviting them to have a seat at the table. Zoom, as we speak, is working on technology to be able to have, whether you are in the room or online, that you would have sort of a video tile. As you see here, for me, all of us would have one of those, even those in the room. So it's very similar to what InSpace is doing here. So many people say, well, live mix is just so hard, so challenging. As I mentioned, there's strategies to help us be more effective. And keep this in mind, the technology will only get better and easier, as it should. So as we see that transition coming in the next decade, we will be able to more seamlessly and more effectively do this with less effort, right? So that's the technology that helps support and get us there. All right, the fourth strategy then is this idea of dual camera access. So we've all heard the phrase, out of sight, out of mind. So true for us to forget who's there when we don't see them. So when you are working in your organizations, when you are on camera, and maybe you've noticed this, you have a bigger footprint when you come on camera, right? More visible in today's remote work. So this is pre-pandemic, but I was in a blended meeting. So there were people in the room, quite a few, and there were several people on the phone joining the meeting, right, through this Polycom phone, pre-pandemic. And the leader of the meeting started the meeting by saying, let's go around and do an icebreaker and just kind of get to know everyone. It was the first meeting for this project. And I watched how the people on the phone were completely forgotten about and not included in that conversation. Why? Let me know in chat. Why? It's sort of a subconscious bias, right? If I don't have that visual footprint, because they couldn't see them. What I like to do, ever since that experience that I had, what I like to do is whenever I'm in that situation, I always lean toward, if I ask a question, I ask and call on or prompt one of the virtual learners first. So what do you think about that, Lewis? And then I go back to one of the in-rooms and then go back to one of the virtual ones, right? So that I always lean toward them first. So for example, if I was doing the icebreaker exercise, I would say, let's hear from those of you joining us on the phone today. How do you start with them first, right? That's a way to make sure that we don't forget. So here's the point on strategy. If you use dual camera access, it allows us to engage with those virtual attendees. We see them, your in-person learners see them. So really important for in-person learners to see virtual learners and virtual learners to see in-person learners. So in this context right here, technically, you would also have a video of the group in the room, right? So there would be another camera tile here and it would show these 4 people up there. And we're fortunate to have the technology, again, that zooms in on the person talking. There's about a 2-second delay, so we kind of work through that. But this is a way, again, to be seen, to be heard, excuse me. And I've also learned that when virtual learners, encouraging them to join early, you can instruct your facilitators or instructors to make sure the virtual attendees join at least 10 minutes ahead of time, and then you engage them in conversation, right? So how's it going? How's it going today? You know, so glad you're here. What are you working on? When we get them warmed up and they start talking, the virtual participants, once they've talked, they're more likely to do it again, which means once we get into the curriculum, they'll be involved. And then, of course, we'll be prompting them, right? So really intentional warm up on the virtual end, and you will see that they will begin to interact with each other. One thing for your instructors to watch out for, though, is what you see in this image, where now the in-person attendees are only looking at the virtual, because we want in-person to interact with in-person also. And we want virtual attendees to interact with virtual attendees. So really, there are some strategies for doing that. Basically, we're really working on engagement for all, regardless of venue. All right, so our 5th and final strategy then is this idea, which I've hinted at as we've gone along here, equitable learning activities. We want to design our learning activities so that everyone, regardless of how you participate in the learning solution or the training that you offer, can actually participate. So if you have, for example, a physical whiteboard in your room, and here's the dreaded phrase, I know you can't see this, but, and then you proceed to use the whiteboard. Obviously that alienates your virtual audience, so does not work. And I know we've tried it too, where we put a camera on the whiteboard. So there are ways to finesse this, but actually using a digital whiteboard, everyone can have access to that digital whiteboard. This means, of course, your in-room learners would need to bring laptops and make sure that they mute their speaker audio and they mute their platform audio to avoid feedback in the room. So you have to be clear about that. But then everyone can participate together, right? So there are ways to do that. Yeah. So creative ways just takes a little more thinking, a little more thought on our part. So again, my book, new this year, has 101 tips in there. They are actionable principles. And there's a capability model with 8 core areas of expertise for developing your instructors who do deliver online learning. And there's also a whole chapter on live mixed learning, a whole chapter on blended learning. And my definition of blended would be blending asynchronous courses on demand with a live training event, live online virtual training. So we have the synchronous and the asynchronous together is what I would call blended. And I do highlight an organization called Competency, who's based out of Norway in Oslo, and they actually have offices in the UK and other places around the world. They do gamified simulated training, but they also can pair it, depending on what the client needs, with live online training. So this idea of really using this blended approach, which the research says is much more effective in terms of learning outcomes. And then I have a whole chapter dedicated to on-camera competency, which I call video literacy. How do we come across on camera well in this new medium, which is very different than being in person, of course, different medium. And then a whole chapter on learning experience design. And so you've probably heard and seen how experience is sort of the hot word: user experience, customer experience, patient experience, and in this case, learning experience applied specifically to virtual training. So a great resource for your instructors. Make sure you check it out. It is available on Amazon UK. Is the cheapest price, is what I'm told. And then it's also on Blackwell's online. And W.H. Smith online. So here's my connection contacts. I would love for you to reach out and join me on LinkedIn. I thought yesterday when Jonathan talked about make sure you have the right people on your LinkedIn and you target appropriately who you want to have on your LinkedIn. I would love to have all of you on my LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out, and I'd love to talk further. So Louis, we'll pass it back to you and take a look at some questions.
Absolutely. I think I'll speak on behalf of everybody when I say thank you, Diana. That was very engaging, and yeah, certainly got the chat flowing all the way through. So yeah, no, thank you very much. In terms of questions, so we've got very quickly one from Keith. Would you mind spelling the company out in Norway's name for him, please?
Yes, absolutely. It's A as in apple, T as in Tom, T as in Tom, E, N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, I. I can put that in the chat here for us too. Yeah, so gamified simulated training. So it's online, it's in 3D modeling, but then they do pair occasionally with live online training. So that's what I was mentioning about the research is so strong about that blend of spacing, learning over time, and having spaced repetition. Think about how we learn. We all learn better that way.
Perfect. Thank you. What contributes to a live mixed facilitator feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, you know, there's so many things. It could be the technical, of course, when issues go wrong. It could be if somebody isn't able to access an activity. It could be the virtual learners disengaging or being in a separate venue, right? And then dealing with the in-person. It's just it really is cognitive overload. So that's why those strategies that I talked about today, and there are many more, but we had time for a few today, are ways to help make this more manageable so that learning through the live mixed venue can be effective.
Perfect. How would you manage the multiple tasks and complex environment of live mixed?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, having that co-facilitator is one way to do that. I've even invited IT. So depending on your organizational structure and how this works, I know we have nonprofits here as well today, and academia, and we also have B2B businesses. So depending on how you are set up in terms of IT support, I've had them kind of stay until I did breakouts just to make sure all of that worked. And then they left, or they were there for the tech rehearsal, or they were there for the opening, or they stayed the whole time. Because when something goes wrong in the middle of your live mixed learning for your instructors, you want to make sure you get it fixed right away. So having that extra support, if you can manage it, is helpful in addition to a co-instructor.
Perfect. I guess leading on from that, Elaine's asked, how would you facilitate breakout rooms?
Oh, good question, Elaine. So people do it different ways. I've talked to those who will facilitate where they will mix the learners together. They'll mix a virtual and an in-person together, but they have to move them outside of the room sometimes, or you need a very big room because people are spreading out. And think about it, you can hear lots of over talking because in the room, all of a sudden, all these groups are talking through venues. You also multiply the risk for something technically going wrong. So I actually don't do it that way. I mean, theoretically, I understand the benefits of mixing the two, but to me, it just complicates and invites more technical challenge. So what I've done, which has worked well, is I have the virtual folks put into virtual breakouts. Usually my virtual co-facilitator will do that, and we'll call them group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. And then in the room, I will divide them into their own breakout groups, breakout group 5, 6, 7, 8. So they're working in person in the room, they're working virtually online. And then when we do the debrief, we make sure they all come together and we hear from, different groups, from both venues.
Perfect. I guess with that, would you recommend a certain class size for live mixed learning, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lewis. Because there are so many more things to manage, I do recommend intentionally keeping that class size smaller, right? Because it just minimizes the risk of things that could go wrong. And you really want to have it be delivered smoothly. And as everyone knows, with technology, challenges are par for the course. They come along with it. So yes, what I've tried to do is keep the total. So the combination of both the offsite and the online learners, under 20, sometimes 15-ish, you might have 6 or 7 online, you might have 5 or 6 in the room, but that's how I've been doing it. And it has worked well to keep it smaller.
Perfect. One from Ian. What's the biggest business benefit of offering hybrid? Why should we consider adding it to our program rather than mandate one venue, web or in person?
Excellent question. I'm glad you asked that, because a lot of our conference, right, yesterday and today has been about watching those profit margins and making good business decisions in the B2B area. So you can certainly continue delivering online if that is working well for you, right? And Access Planet has this great LMS to help support what you do. Or if you can continue to deliver on in the classroom, traditional classroom, which many of you are doing both, it sounds like, continue to do that, right? So you would only have really a business case for doing live mixed if your client, for example, has people all over the world globally, and you have people locally. So it would be, if you have the constraints geographically where it requires you to have in-room and online, that would be probably the way to go. But if virtual is working for you, or just traditional classroom is working for you, I would keep doing that because it's working. So just know when those unique circumstances do come up that you have a strategic plan to do this well, and then you know how to do it.
Perfect, thank you. And then last one, obviously you touched on the breakout rooms and how you would structure those, but how would you structure group session activities in a live mixed environment and still ensure that all of the learners were engaged and getting the fullest experience, really?
Yeah. So sometimes I've seen this too, where somebody does a survey, right? So they hand out a quiz or a survey. So obviously everything needs to be digital because we have the virtual attendees that are joining us. So, you know, there's so many in many of the platforms, or in many of the third-party providers, you know, Miro has that collaborative whiteboard. There's so many different ones where you can do surveys. In Microsoft Teams, you can do surveys and forms and evaluations too. So just providing the digital tools that everyone has access to. And so making sure the in-person participants know to bring their laptops with them. And I also let people know to be camera ready so that they can access things. And then when you do learning activity assignments, you know, making sure you even send some things ahead of time, because things can go wrong. People can say, well, I never got it. So send them early, send them maybe and check in, make sure people did receive them. So you're just preparing. It's a lot of work to make sure that things go smooth. So I like to think about it as an iceberg metaphor, where at the tip of the iceberg, right, you see this little tip and it works great and execution is smooth, but underneath there's so much we're doing so that it can be smooth execution on the top.
Love the analogy. Thank you very much, Diana. I think that's all the questions. If anyone's got anything else, feel free to drop them in the chat. But if not, so I mean, what a talk to round us off for Everest 2022. I'm sure we can all agree Howles Associates have certainly been innovative with initiatives they've introduced to help not only survive through the pandemic, but now truly thrive in the hybrid world. So thank you again, Diana, for joining us at Everest.